I'm the Director of the State Library of South Australia, and it's my absolute privilege to welcome you here tonight. Tonight's event, Leading the Nation, commemorating 50 years to the day that since South Australia took a bold and compassionate step towards equality. I begin by acknowledging the country in which we gather this evening, Garniata, the lands of the Gurn. I pay my respect to elders past and present, and acknowledge their enduring connection to the lands, to the water, and to our culture. I extend this respect to all First Nations people here with us tonight, and in doing so, honour our tradition of storytelling, justice, and resilience that has shaped this place for 65,000 years. Tonight's event invites us to reflect on a moment in history when South Australians responded to tragedy not with silence but with action. A moment when injustice sparked a movement and when voices that had long been marginalised were finally heard. It was a time of courage, community and conviction. It was here in this city that the first steps were taken towards reform that would ripple across the nation. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge some of our special guests joining us this evening. We're honoured to welcome the Right Honourable Lord Mayor of the City of Adelaide, Jane O'Mac-Smith, representatives from the History Trust of South Australia, including brand new Director Justina Yocum, and also Greg Mackey, I'm not sure, not here yet. He was intending to come, so former Director of the History Trust and passionate social champion and arts ally. Friends of the State Library of South Australia, contributors to this exhibition, and to those who played a role in preserving and sharing this important history. The creation of tonight's event began with a conversation with historian and author Tim Reeves, who approached us last year with a vision to mark this anniversary. It has been a privilege to partner with Tim to curate two exhibitions. One is here on site in our Treasures Gallery, which you'll see later this evening, and the other is a companion online exhibition launching very soon, like next week, which explores the story of reform and remembrance in greater depth. Together with the History Trust of South Australia, we are proud to share these commemorations. They honour the legacy of those who stood out, spoke out, and shaped a more inclusive future. Tonight's panel discussion brings this history into a conversation. We are joined by three distinguished speakers whose works and lives are deeply connected to this story. The Honourable Robert Simms MLC represents the Greens in the Legislative Council. Robert is the first out gay man to represent South Australia in the Senate and one of only two openly gay members of State Parliament today. Robert is a member of the committee overseeing this year's commemorative event and has long been a passionate advocate for equality and inclusion. Welcome, Robert. Tim Reeves is a historian and author and adjunct research fellow at the University of South Australia. His book, The Death of Dr. Duncan, is a landmark work that helped shape public understanding of his history and enduring significance. Will Sergeant OAM is widely known through his historian alter ego, Dr. Gertrude Glossop. Will came out in 1972 and has been a passionate activist since. He was a founding member of the Adelaide Gay Liberation Front and has contributed to the LGBTQIA+ community through decades of advocacy, storytelling and public engagement. His contributions were recognised with an OAM in 2023. We are deeply grateful to each of our speakers for joining us tonight. Their voices help us to understand not only what happened, but why it matters. So now it is my pleasure to invite our moderator for this evening, Robert Simms, to begin the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along tonight. I also want to acknowledge the presence of the Lord Mayor, the Honourable Jane O'Mac-Smith, somebody who has been a long-term advocate for the LGBTI community. So thank you for that, Lord Mayor. I know you've given quite a few dresses to Will's alter ego over the years as well, so thank you for that. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all and to have made the hop, skip and the jump from State Parliament and Legislative Council where this law reform happened 50 years ago to the day. So I proudly wore my rainbow socks in Legislative Council today in recognition of the amazing work of all of those brave activists 50 years ago today. I'm going to start us off just by reminding people that some of the things we're going to talk about today, a little bit difficult to hear. Of course, we're going to hear a bit about acts of violence and some historic language that people might find offensive. If that's how you feel, or if you feel uncomfortable at any time, please feel free to just step outside. And there's absolutely no judgment around that, so feel free to step in and out of the room as you wish. I also bring apologies tonight from my parliamentary colleague Ian Hunter, the other gay in the village at his state parliament. Ian really wanted to be here tonight, but he is the government whip, and so Parliament is still in session and he is whipping my colleagues into line as we speak. Okay, with that I'll get us started, and I want to start with you, Tim. You wrote your honours thesis on Dr. Duncan back in 1992, and indeed you've written a lot about the life of Dr. Duncan over the years. What sparked your interest in this case?
Well, I went to the University of Adelaide in 1989 and started a BA. Best years of my life. I had so much fun. Gay and lesbian studies were starting to be recognised but weren't taught at Adelaide. And second year, so in 1990, there was a friend of mine who was 2 years ahead of me and was doing honours in politics, and he did his thesis on those three bills, 72, 73, 75. And that's when Duncan came across my orbit. But I was fascinated, not about the bills, I was fascinated about Duncan and that first bill. And so that's when I thought I want to do honours in 2 years' time, when it will be the 20th anniversary of his death. But I had to test my mettle, and so I did a third-year course called Fascism and National Socialism, went to the lecturer and said that I wanted to write the major paper on the Nazis' treatment of homosexual men. They wore the pink triangle, they were killed by their thousands in the concentration camps. And he looked at me and said, I know nothing about that. And this was the senior lecturer. And I was so deeply shocked. And I don't mean to criticise him, he was very kind and helpful. But he also said, I don't think you'll be able to find the material you need to write a 5,000 word paper, which was about a third of the honours thesis. So I decided on the spot. I nearly said, I can't say bugger. Is bugger all right? Bugger this. I decided I'd write him a distinction.
This is the language I was warning you
Yes. I decided I'd write him a distinction paper on the spot, but I also committed to the honours thesis. So I actually owe a huge debt to him because he kind of set me on that path, and I've been on that path now for nearly 35 years.
Well, Tim, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about Dr. Duncan and who he was and what happened on that night, but I want to bring you in now, Will, just to talk a bit about your experience at that time. So you were around, obviously, at the period the Duncan case happened. What was your experience as a gay man at that time, and in particular, what was it like coming out?
Thanks, Robert. Good morning, everyone. Yes, 1972 is a very significant year in my life because it's my coming out year, as was mentioned. And I think, casting back 50 years ago, things were still pretty hidden, and I think my story indicates that. And I know some people have heard my story, haven't you? Well, you're going to hear it again. So it's revision for you and it's new information for those who haven't. So I was one of those people that had homosexual desires in my 10 years, but drove it deep down. I really do believe in Freudian repression and denial. It's very strong. And so, despite my flamboyant style, I really tried to be a model heterosexual, but it didn't work. And what happened was, in fact, at the end of 1971, I took a break from full-time studying accountancy and got a job in a chartered accountant's office in the city of Adelaide to earn money to pay for aversion therapy. Not conversion therapy, aversion therapy. Electroconvulsive therapy to be cured. You have to remember the rector down at Holy Trinity, down at Shilton, and Dr. John Corey, psychologist at Flinders University, advocated that. They believe people with ECT could be cured. And then I sort of had the realization, accept yourself, come on. So what I did, I started coming out to family and friends, and I've got family and a friend here tonight to whom I came out. Thank you very much. But you know, we didn't live under a rock, but they couldn't say, oh yes, I've got a gay friend, I can introduce you to someone. I know a group where you can attend, or there's a pub where you can go to. No one seemed to know. And of course in May, on the 10th of May, or just before that, I think of the office I had heard that gay men met down by the river at City Bridge. You know, it was probably some throwaway line, oh, the Pufters, everyone knows that they meet down by the City Bridge. And I thought, perhaps this is what I might have to do to meet someone. And then, of course, on the 10th of May, Duncan was thrown in the river and drowned, and I thought, well, perhaps that's not the best idea. But salvation was at hand, and I have to thank my sister Susie, because in August, Dennis Altman's groundbreaking book, Homosexual Oppression and Liberation, the launch, Adelaide launch, was held here at Adelaide Uni, and Susie was a student, and she came home with a pamphlet. And of course, I love telling young academic Jewel Matthews the story of that night, because after the launch, she leapt up and said, "Straights out!" And that was the formation of Gay Liberation Front. So Susie brought home this pamphlet, and I can remember clearly after, on a Friday evening, all the boys from the office would go to the Duke of York and have a few beers. Trying to be one of them, I would do that. But this night, I slipped across the road to the Women's Liberation Centre and went to my first gay lib meeting. And I found my tribe. Radical young gay men and women. Gay was an inclusive term back then, who were glad to be gay. You're out of the closets and into the street. Blatant is beautiful, the personal is political. So that was my entree into gay life in Adelaide.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Will. I can relate to the straight acting thing. Can I say, this is the world that obviously Dr. Duncan came into. So Adelaide was a very different place in terms of a homophobic location. And there was also these beats that you've talked about. Well, this was the place that Dr. Duncan came into. Can you tell us a bit about that, Tim? He was only here in Adelaide for 7 weeks before his death, but who was Dr. Duncan?
Oh gosh, if I tell you he was a queer fish, I don't mean that flippantly. He had an unfortunate upbringing. He was born in London in 1930. His parents brought him to Melbourne when he was 6. He had a very controlling father. A nurse later said that Dickens would not have imagined worse of the way he was brought up. He entered Melbourne Grammar School. He was a brilliant student. He took firsts in French, Greek and Latin, but he was timid, he was shy, he was not very good at sports, he was actually not physically strong, he never learned to swim. That's a key issue. The 11 years he spent there, he said he was miserable, and there's a photo up there in the exhibition of him in year 11, and he looks very unhappy. He went to the University of Melbourne. He got tuberculosis. He was so sick that he was removed to a sanatorium. While he was there, his father died. His mother had died when he was 13 of cancer. He inherited a substantial estate at the age of 25, about $500,000 in today's money. He went to London and then Cambridge and restarted his tertiary education, ending up with a PhD, and went to teach at the University of Bristol, which was a disaster because he just could not. He was so shy now, he was almost taciturn, he couldn't communicate with students. The job came up at Adelaide, he applied and got it incredibly, and again you'll see the telegram up there, he turned the job down. He very nearly didn't come. So gay law reform could have followed quite a different path, let alone at age 95 he could still be alive. But he changed his mind again, and he came. He arrived on the 25th of March. He started work on the 27th of March, and he was dead within 7 weeks. And just to explain again another weird way that he behaved, he was met by Professor Lukey, who was his boss, and Duncan, who was only a lecturer, so just the lowest level, expected to be addressed as professor when he had not attained that title. So it's a bit of the Cambridge scholar entitlement in play there, I think.
And so it was on the 10th of May 1972 that Dr. Duncan was murdered. And Will, I know both you and Tim have talked a little bit about what happened on that night, but can you talk us through exactly what happened to Dr. Duncan? What do we know about that story?
Yes, it's a very interesting story, I think. And I do use the New Scotland Yard report when I talk about what was happening, because I think that's policemen or police people, men, they were men, investigating policemen, and they know each other and they know how they operate. So I put great credence on the New Scotland Yard report. What happened within a month of the death? It was within the month, wasn't it, Tim, that the inquest was called. And then a month after that, the result of the inquest was death by persons for whom there is no evidence. And so the New Scotland Yard then investigated over the next few months, and they submitted their report in October. And of course, as we know, and I think this is really egregious, that it was not released for 30 years. And so it was released in 2002, 30 years on. And looking at that report, listen to this and see what you think. It was about 10:30 on the night of the 10th of May. And two police officers, Corley and Clayton, had been drinking at the King's Head, a farewell for another officer. So obviously they had a few drinks. And their story was to Scotland Yard, New Scotland Yard. We decided we would drive up to North Adelaide, pick up a couple of lady friends, and go to a disco in the western suburbs. So they're driving down King William Road, they come to the intersection of Victoria Drive and King William Road, and Clayton suddenly says, oh, I have to vomit. I'm feeling terrible. Oh, we better go to the toilet over there, which just happened to be number 1 beat, didn't it? And the vice squad knew, and they were vice squad, plain clothes. They knew very well that location and the pursuing of homosexual men. So they drove over and parked there. So what would his friend, the driver, Corley, do? Well, he'd wait for him to go into the toilet and vomit and come out, wouldn't he? Oh no, not he. He sees a police car parked across the road. So he goes over to the police, uniformed police officer and said, would you mind leaving the scene for 10 minutes? You're buggering up our boofters. He goes back and he says he's watching 2 people, but he goes to the toilet to check on Corley. And then he sees another police officer, uniform, who was based at the police station there, on the city bridge. And he goes to speak to him, and the officer knows that Corley is a vice squad police officer and says, oh, hello, John. And Corley says, fuck off, fuck off. So he's clearing the scene of any uniformed police officers. And then there's another man sitting up overlooking the Torrens, smoking a cigarette. It's one Williamson, who was a retired army person and had been drinking at the army drill hall there across the road. There was a bar there. So they go and clear him out of the scene. And so isn't that interesting? What are they doing? What's their agenda, please? And then, and I believe New Scotland Yard, I think they saw Duncan and Roger James sitting down by the river, and they thought, oh, we've got to come here, we've cleared the area, and they threw them both in the river. They claimed, of course, this is just New Scotland Yard report, what Corley and Clayton said, they were there for 10 minutes, from 10:40 to 10:50. But do you know, an hour later, at 11:50, Officers who knew Clayton saw him at a street light in the city driving home, and according Clayton said, after he vomited in the toilet, they decided they wouldn't go and pick up the letters, they wouldn't go to the dance, they'd go home. So they said they left the scene at 11:50, drove home. So of course they couldn't possibly have been there when Duncan and James were thrown in the river, because Duncan's watch stopped at 11:07, so it was thrown in just after 11. But, an hour later, 11:50, there he was driving through the city. So I do believe if that report had been released, which to this day I think it should have, I see no reason, and I think the police and politicians obfuscated, I clearly do, that, and the Scotland Yard police thought they had enough evidence for a prosecution, that the outcome would have been very different. But if you read the new Scotland Yard report, clearly Corley and Clayton were lying.
So Duncan is murdered on that night. There's an inquest. Can you talk us through some of the evidence that was provided at that time, in particular from the pathologist? And some of that was really quite shocking, wasn't it?
It was, and some language issues are about to come up, so you've been warned. If I tell you that the pathologist who conducted the autopsy was Dr. Colin Manock, you all know, I'm sure, Dr. Colin Manock, whose findings have been questioned in a number of major cases. So Duncan, the body lay on the riverbed overnight. It was retrieved at about 9:15 the next morning. Manock did the autopsy. He prepared his report. He was one of the first people to give evidence at the inquest. And his conclusion was that Duncan was a passive homosexual, someone who engages in receptive anal intercourse, because he had a funnel-shaped anus. Now, this language was so shocking that even the advertiser didn't report it. It reported the homosexuality, but nothing about the anus. The extraordinary thing about that is that we can trace this back to an 1857 book by a French doctor. I don't know where Manock learned that. I can't believe he would have learned that at medical school. And this book, which is now completely discredited, said that passive homosexuals had wide, protruding, feminine buttocks, and that men who practiced fellatio had short teeth, thick lips, and crooked mouths. Of course, what happened to women who did that? They did not suffer any abnormalities. So, I mean, it's funny on one level, but on another level, it's deeply disturbing because, as the journalist said, it was chilling that the law would accept the definition of homosexuality in purely pathological terms, and more than that homosexuality was equated with deformed physiology. Also, talking about homosexuality is just it's the sex act, not the person, the cultural condition. So the coroner accepted that, and in fact, again, in the exhibition you'll see the front page of the autopsy report, and I think it's the third paragraph, it just says, Dr. Duncan was a homosexual, and it was based on exactly that rubbish that Manock peddled from that book. If they'd looked a bit further, they would have found that Duncan had arrived with a Gaytime Friendship Society membership of a London club called Spartacus, a gay travel guide which listed the beach in Adelaide where he died, and of course he died at the beach, but they didn't consider that. It was his funnel-shaped anus.
You're right, it is shocking to hear, and it does give an insight into some of the attitudes at the time. I just want to move on to you in a moment, Will, but I did also want to ask you, Tim, it wasn't the only indignity around the death of Dr. Duncan, was there? It was also a case that the body was thrown back into the water? Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, thank you for mentioning that. It was, I spoke to the aqualung diver who actually retrieved the body, and he refused to speak to me, but it was well known. So the body was pulled out. If you want to see it, it's kind of disturbing on one level, but the ABC, if you go online and type in ABC 80 stories in Dr. Duncan, there is the footage there. So at this stage he was in rigor mortis, so his arms were stretched out in front of him. They show the body being pulled out, but they don't show that the television cameraman arrived late. And the police put the body back into the river and poured it out again, which is an act of desecration of just extraordinary. And it's really so distressing to think that they would treat a body like that. Apparently they thought it was a drunk. Well, it doesn't matter who it was. So that was one of quite a few black marks that the police earned in relation to the Duncan case.
So, Will, there's this shocking murder that's happened of a gay man. You were a gay activist at that time. You touched on this a little bit before, but what were your views around the police involvement, and how did you start to organise around that as an activist?
Out of Gay Liberation Front grew Gay Activist Alliance, which is more of an activist aspect. And I suppose we were the rat bags, and I'll talk about camp later, who were the responsible ones. So we like to do edgy sort of things. So my understanding, I can't remember personally any direct involvement with the police, but certainly we did call very strongly for the release of the new Scotland Yard report. We thought that was crucial, but as you know, it fell on deaf ears. Nothing happened there. But we love doing, zaps, as we call them, which were sort of lightning strikes that challenged publicly anything that was homophobic. For example, in Gay Pride Week, so in 1973, I returned to full-time study because I didn't need money for aversion therapy, you see. So I had lots of time for gay activism. As I say, I threw into the activism with gay abandon because I had all this time on my hands. And we did a whole range of things. And I remember during Gay Pride Week in September, one thing we did particularly, we suspended 4 effigies of dressed as police officers under the University footbridge, and we named each one Corley, Clayton, Hudson, and I think O'Shea. I can't remember the 4th one. And we did it under cover of darkness in the night time. And my job the next morning was to contact the media to get them down there. But I think they got onto the police because they were removed very, very quickly. So I don't think there's any public evidence of that. But that was one of the clear activities that I do remember. And I suppose to